Lila Anderson, a 42-year-old woman, had spent the last 20 years working in a corporate job at a prestigious company in New York City. Despite having a steady income and a successful career, she always felt like something was missing. Her days were spent in endless meetings, emails, and paperwork, and over time, the spark that once drove her had faded. She had always dreamed of becoming a chef, but life had other plans, responsibilities, bills, and the demands of a busy career took precedence. For years, Lila buried her passion for cooking, pushing it aside in favor of more practical pursuits. She often spent her weekends experimenting in the kitchen, recreating dishes from her childhood that reminded her of the warmth and love of home. But these moments were fleeting, just small escapes from the monotony of her day-to-day life. The idea of leaving her well-paying job to pursue a career in the culinary world seemed impossible. That all changed one fateful morning when Lila received an unexpected email. The company was undergoing a major restructuring, and she was part of the layoff group. The news hit hard. On one hand, she felt a deep sense of loss. A job that had defined her for so long was now gone. But on the other hand, there was a flicker of excitement, even though it was quickly overshadowed by uncertainty. As she sat in her small apartment, staring out the window at the bustling city below, Lila couldn't help but wonder if this was a sign. Maybe this was her opportunity to take control of her life and finally pursue the one thing that had always brought her joy, cooking. She remembered the countless hours spent cooking with her mother, the joy of preparing meals for family gatherings, and the feeling of pride when her dishes were met with smiles and praise. It was then that she made a decision. "I'm not going to let fear hold me back anymore," Lila whispered to herself, her voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "I'm going to open my own restaurant." It wasn't a decision made lightly. The road ahead would be challenging, filled with uncertainties and risks. But for the first time in years, Lila felt a spark of hope. It was time to chase her dream, no matter how late it seemed. With a newfound sense of determination, Lila began researching everything she could about the restaurant industry. She made a list of the dishes she wanted to feature, comfort food from her childhood, passed down through generations of her family. Each dish carried a story, a memory, and she wanted to share that with the world. The following days were a blur of activity. Lila started creating a business plan, researching locations, and meeting with local suppliers. She knew she had a lot to learn, but the more she delved into the details, the more her passion for cooking reignited. It felt like the right decision, the only decision. Lila's heart raced as she made calls, set appointments, and juggled the overwhelming tasks that came with starting a business. The uncertainty was terrifying, but it was also exhilarating. She wasn't just chasing a dream, she was reclaiming a part of herself that had been buried for too long. It was a new beginning, a chance to leave behind the world of corporate monotony and embrace a future filled with possibility, flavor, and fulfillment. Lila Anderson was ready to start a new chapter, and she was determined to make it count. The excitement of making her decision was quickly replaced by the reality of what it would take to turn her dream into a tangible business. Lila spent the next few weeks researching every aspect of starting a restaurant. She pored over books, watched videos, and attended webinars about restaurant management, menu development, and marketing. She was determined to be prepared, but the more she learned, the more she realized how much she still had to figure out. First and foremost, Lila needed a concept. She knew she wanted to create a place where people could feel at home, a restaurant that felt like a cozy kitchen, where the smell of fresh food and family recipes filled the air. Her menu would feature traditional dishes from her childhood, recipes passed down from her mother and grandmother. But it wasn't just the food that needed careful thought. The ambience, the service, and even the location all had to reflect the warmth and comfort she hoped to convey. Lila made a list of the dishes she wanted to feature: creamy mac and cheese, savory pot roast, fresh bread baked daily, and her grandmother's famous apple pie. Each dish held a special place in her heart and had been a part of her family's gatherings for as long as she could remember. These were the meals that brought people together, and she knew they would be the foundation of her restaurant. But creating the perfect menu was just the beginning. Lila knew she needed to find the right location. She scoured the city for a suitable space, visiting neighborhood after neighborhood, looking for a place with the right energy, the right vibe. She wanted somewhere that wasn't too fancy but still offered the potential to attract a steady stream of customers. After weeks of searching, she found a small but charming location in a quiet part of town, a place that was just off the beaten path but had a sense of community and intimacy. It was perfect. Next came the task of budgeting. Lila had a savings account, but it wasn't nearly enough to cover all the costs. The rent alone would be a significant part of her expenses, and she still needed to pay for renovations, kitchen equipment, initial inventory, and staff wages. She spent countless hours with spreadsheets, working out the numbers and trying to cut costs wherever she could. The more she calculated, the more it became clear that starting a restaurant was an expensive endeavor, and she would need outside funding to make it happen. Lila didn't come from a wealthy family, and asking for financial help wasn't easy. But she knew that if she wanted to succeed, she had to take the plunge. She reached out to a few banks for a small business loan, but the process was slow and nerve-wracking. The paperwork seemed endless, and the more she spoke with potential lenders, the more doubts crept into her mind. What if she couldn't secure the funding? What if she failed? To make matters more complicated, Lila had to navigate the logistics of hiring the right staff. She needed a chef, servers, a bartender, and kitchen staff. She wanted people who were passionate about food, but who also shared her vision for creating a warm, inviting atmosphere. The hiring process was just as daunting as everything else. She had never managed a team before, and she worried about how she would handle the responsibilities of being a boss while also trying to run the kitchen. Her first challenge came when she tried to negotiate with suppliers. She needed fresh, high-quality ingredients for her dishes, but getting the right supplies at the right price was harder than she had anticipated. One supplier quoted her an absurd price for produce, while another couldn't guarantee timely delivery. Lila knew she had to get creative to keep costs low without sacrificing quality. She began reaching out to local farmers and independent growers, hoping to build a relationship that would be mutually beneficial. It was a slow process, but she eventually found a few good suppliers who offered reasonable prices and high-quality ingredients. One evening, after a particularly challenging day of running errands and managing the business details, Lila sat on the couch in her apartment, exhausted. She stared at her phone, reading a text from her mom. "How's everything going, honey? You've got this." Lila's eyes welled up with tears. Her mom had always been her biggest supporter, and her words of encouragement were a reminder of why she was doing this. She was doing it for herself, yes, but she was also doing it for the generations that came before her. The recipes she was bringing to life weren't just food, they were part of her heritage, her family's story, and she was determined to carry that legacy forward. It wasn't easy, and it was far from glamorous. But Lila had come to understand that the road to success wasn't a straight path. It was a winding, unpredictable journey, filled with both setbacks and triumphs. But she wasn't giving up. This was her dream, and she was going to do everything in her power to make it work. As the weeks passed, Lila began to see the pieces come together. Her business loan was approved, the renovations on the space were underway, and she had started to hire the staff who would help bring her vision to life. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was happening. Lila was one step closer to opening the doors of her own restaurant, and she was ready to face whatever came next with a renewed sense of determination. Opening the doors of Lila's kitchen was a dream come true, but the early days were anything but easy. Lila had spent months planning, researching, and preparing, but nothing could have fully prepared her for the overwhelming reality of running a restaurant. The excitement of the grand opening quickly faded into the grueling routine of managing a business, and soon, the pressure started to weigh heavily on her shoulders. The first day, the grand opening, was a whirlwind of activity. Lila had invited family, friends, and a few local food critics to help launch the restaurant. The small, cozy space was packed with excited customers eager to try her family's recipes. The air was filled with the rich smells of freshly baked bread and simmering sauces, and Lila's heart swelled with pride as she greeted each customer, offering them a taste of home. But as the day wore on, things started to unravel. There were long wait times for food as her kitchen staff, though passionate, struggled to keep up with the orders. The front-of-house team was overwhelmed by the constant flow of customers, and there were moments when orders were mixed up or forgotten altogether. Lila did her best to remain calm, but the stress of trying to manage everything at once was starting to show. By the end of the night, Lila felt like she had run a marathon. Her back ached from being on her feet for hours, and her mind was spinning from all the things that had gone wrong. Her dreams of creating a seamless, joyful dining experience for everyone seemed distant, overshadowed by the reality of the chaotic opening night. The next day was no better. The kitchen had run out of key ingredients, and there were issues with the suppliers that she hadn't anticipated. Lila spent the morning on the phone, trying to solve problems while keeping the restaurant running smoothly. She was still learning how to manage everything at once, and the weight of it all felt heavier each day. One evening, after the restaurant had closed and the last of the dishes were washed, Lila sat in the dimly lit dining room, staring at the empty tables. The thrill of opening her own restaurant had quickly given way to doubt. Was she cut out for this? Was it too late to go back? She missed the comfort of her old office job, the security of knowing what each day would bring. But then, she thought of her grandmother's apple pie, the recipe she'd perfected over the years, and how it had always brought people together. That was the heart of her dream, the desire to share something meaningful, to connect with others through food. Lila took a deep breath and decided that she wasn't going to quit, no matter how hard it got. She knew that the road to success wasn't going to be smooth, but she wasn't about to back down. She had come this far, and she was determined to see it through. To make things easier, Lila decided to streamline some of her operations. She started by revisiting her menu and cutting down on some items that were taking too much time to prepare. She also focused on training her staff more effectively, working closely with them to ensure that they understood the rhythm of the restaurant and how to deliver the best customer experience. Lila spent hours in the kitchen, refining her recipes and making sure that every dish was just right. She had to let go of the idea of perfection, but she knew that consistency was key. Despite the setbacks, there were small victories. One evening, a couple came in for dinner and complimented Lila on her mashed potatoes, saying they reminded them of their grandmothers. That simple compliment made her heart soar. It was these moments, the quiet, personal exchanges with customers, that reminded her why she was doing this. But even with the small wins, the stress was taking its toll. Lila found herself working 14-hour days, with no time to rest or recharge. She was constantly juggling tasks, running the kitchen, dealing with suppliers, training staff, and keeping up with the books. She felt like she was always behind, always catching up. At night, when she finally sat down to eat a quick meal alone in her small apartment, she would collapse into bed, only to wake up a few hours later to start all over again. Her friends and family noticed the toll the restaurant was taking on her. Her best friend, Sarah, who had been one of her biggest supporters, called her one evening after seeing how exhausted Lila looked. "You're working yourself to the bone, Lila," Sarah said. "When was the last time you took a break? You need to slow down before you burn out." Lila sighed, feeling the weight of Sarah's words. She knew her friend was right, but it felt impossible to take time off. The restaurant needed her, and she couldn't afford to leave things in anyone else's hands. She was the heart and soul of Lila's kitchen, and she didn't know how to step away, even for a moment. "I can't afford to slow down, Sarah," Lila said, her voice strained. "If I stop now, everything might fall apart." "You don't have to do it all yourself," Sarah replied gently. "You're not alone in this, you know. It's okay to ask for help." Lila took a deep breath, contemplating her friend's advice. She realized Sarah was right, she didn't have to carry the burden on her own. It was time to trust her team more, to delegate tasks, and to take care of herself in order to be the best leader she could be. The next day, Lila took her first real break in weeks. She spent a few hours at the park, sitting on a bench, breathing in the fresh air, and reflecting on the journey so far. It was a small step, but it made a world of difference. She returned to the restaurant with a clearer mind, ready to face whatever challenges came next. Though the struggles were far from over, Lila now understood that the path to success would be filled with both triumphs and setbacks. She was learning, growing, and most importantly, she was starting to believe that her dream was possible. One step at a time. After the rocky start to Lila's kitchen, Lila realized that she couldn't keep putting out fires every day without a clear strategy for growth. The early struggles had been hard, but they taught her one important lesson: the business needed a strong foundation, and that foundation wasn't just about serving great food. It was about building a brand, something that people could connect with, something that made Lila's kitchen more than just a restaurant. It needed to be a place where people felt a sense of belonging, a place they wanted to return to not just for the food, but for the experience. Lila spent the next few weeks focusing on the bigger picture. She knew that her food was her strongest asset: her grandmother's apple pie, her mother's pot roast, and the mac and cheese that everyone loved, but she also realized that Lila's kitchen had to stand for more than just great meals. It had to tell a story. "I'm not just selling food," Lila thought. "I'm sharing my family's story. I'm sharing a piece of who I am." To begin the process of building her brand, Lila took a step back and looked at what Lila's kitchen represented. It wasn't just about comfort food, it was about tradition, home, and the power of family recipes passed down through generations. It was about food that nourished not just the body but the soul. She decided that she wanted the restaurant to feel like a home away from home for everyone who walked through the door. Lila redesigned the restaurant's website to reflect that vision. She included personal stories behind the dishes on the menu, sharing anecdotes about her childhood, her mother's cooking, and the memories that inspired each dish. She even posted photos of her family and the old kitchen where she first learned to cook. The website now felt like an extension of Lila's heart and soul, something customers could connect with on a deeper level. The next step in building her brand was creating a social media presence. Lila knew that in today's digital world, a strong online presence was essential. She created an Instagram account for Lila's Kitchen and began posting pictures of her dishes, the behind-the-scenes kitchen action, and snippets of the stories she had written for the website. She also started a Facebook page where customers could leave reviews and share their own memories of family meals. The response was overwhelming. People loved seeing the personal touch, and the stories of Lila's family brought a sense of authenticity to the restaurant that many of her customers were looking for. As the weeks passed, Lila began to notice something changing. The restaurant started to feel more like a community hub than just a place to eat. More and more locals were coming in, not just for the food, but for the sense of connection. They were coming to celebrate birthdays, anniversaries, and even just to catch up with old friends over a good meal. The warmth and authenticity Lila had injected into the brand were resonating with people, and it was starting to show. But Lila wasn't just focused on building her brand online. She knew that connecting with the local community in person was just as important. She started to attend local farmers markets, bringing along samples of her dishes and handing out flyers for the restaurant. She also partnered with nearby businesses for cross-promotions. For example, she worked with a local coffee shop to offer discounts to customers who dined at both places. It was a way to support other small businesses while also getting her name out there. One of the most rewarding moments for Lila came when she attended a local charity event hosted by the city. It was a fundraiser for a local homeless shelter, and the organizers had invited several local restaurants to donate food for the event. Lila saw it as an opportunity to give back to the community that had supported her and Lila's Kitchen from the beginning. Lila donated her famous pot roast, along with a few side dishes. As she served food at the event, she interacted with the guests, telling them about her restaurant and the vision behind her cooking. People were genuinely interested, not just in the food, but in her story. Many of them came into the restaurant in the weeks that followed, drawn by the personal connection they felt to Lila and her mission. That event was a turning point for Lila's Kitchen. Lila realized that the more she engaged with her community, the stronger her brand became. People weren't just coming in for the food anymore, they were coming in because they felt a personal connection to Lila and to the story behind the food. The restaurant had become more than just a business, it had become part of the fabric of the community. Despite the growing success, there were still challenges ahead. Lila knew that she needed to keep evolving, to find new ways to reach her customers and keep them coming back. One evening, as she sat at her desk, staring at the growing stack of bills, the thought crossed her mind again, how long can I keep this up? But then, she remembered the night she first decided to open her restaurant. She had been uncertain, scared, and unsure of her abilities, but she had made the choice to take a risk and follow her passion. It wasn't just about the money, it was about creating something meaningful, something that could change lives. Lila's Kitchen had become a part of the community, and that was worth everything. With renewed determination, Lila set her sights on the next phase of growth. She began planning special events at the restaurant, family dinners, holiday celebrations, and even cooking classes where she could teach others how to make the dishes she had perfected over the years. It was her way of continuing to share her passion for food and building a deeper connection with her customers. Lila's Kitchen wasn't just a restaurant anymore, it was a community, a place where people could feel at home, where they could celebrate life's milestones and find comfort in the food they ate. And that, Lila knew, was the key to her success. By the time Lila's Kitchen reached its second year, the restaurant had become a familiar name in the community. Locals came for the warm atmosphere, the comforting smells of home-cooked meals, and the personal touch that made every visit feel special. Lila had created something beautiful, something that carried her family's legacy into the heart of the city. But behind the comforting smiles and delicious plates, the challenges of running a restaurant were relentless. Every day brought new problems to solve, and success was never as secure as it appeared from the outside. The early months of the second year were promising. Business was steady, and weekends were fully booked. Customers often left glowing reviews online, praising the warm homemade flavor of Lila's food and the kindness of her staff. Local newspapers even wrote a short feature on her story, a woman who had left her corporate job to follow her passion. That article brought in a wave of new customers. For a while, it felt like Lila's dream was truly flourishing. She hired 2 new servers, added a few more dishes to the menu, and even considered expanding her hours. But just as things were looking up, the cracks began to show. One Thursday evening, a delivery of fresh produce didn't arrive on time. It was the 3rd time that month the supplier had failed to meet the schedule. Without enough ingredients for her signature pot roast and mac and cheese, Lila was forced to scramble. She and her staff raced to the nearest grocery stores to buy substitutes. The night went on, but the quality wasn't the same, and she could tell the difference. So could her customers. Later that week, one of her regulars mentioned the change. The pot roast was still good, but not quite like before, he said kindly. Lila forced a smile. Thank you for your honesty. I'll make sure it's perfect next time. Inside, she was frustrated. She had built her reputation on consistency, and now she felt it slipping through her fingers. The following month brought a new challenge. Her sous chef Daniel gave notice that he was leaving to take a job at a bigger restaurant across town. Lila tried to hide her disappointment but couldn't. Daniel had been with her since the beginning, one of the first people who believed in her vision. Losing him felt like losing a piece of the restaurant's soul. Training someone new wasn't easy. The kitchen was the heart of Lila's kitchen, and every small mistake showed up on the plate. Orders were delayed, flavors weren't balanced, and one night a customer even sent back a dish that was overcooked. For the first time, Lila received a negative review online. She read it late at night, sitting in the dark with her laptop open. We used to love this place, but the quality has gone down lately. Hope they fix it soon. Those words cut deep. She had poured everything into this restaurant, her time, her savings, her heart, and still it felt like she was one step away from failure. The stress began to take a toll on her health. She was sleeping less, eating poorly, and spending nearly every waking hour at the restaurant. Her friends noticed the change. One evening, Sarah dropped by unannounced, carrying 2 cups of coffee. You look exhausted, she said, sitting across from Lila in the empty dining room. Lila sighed. It's just, everything feels like it's falling apart. I can't keep up. Sarah smiled softly. You can't control everything, Lila. But you can remember why you started this. You didn't open this place to be perfect. You opened it because you love it. The words hit home. That night, Lila stayed after closing, looking around at the quiet restaurant, the worn wooden tables, the dim glow of the hanging lights, the smell of spices still lingering in the air. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen, how simple it was, how love had always been the secret ingredient. Maybe she had lost sight of that. The next morning, Lila made changes. She called a meeting with her staff and spoke to them honestly. We've been struggling, she admitted, and it's okay to admit that. But I believe in what we're doing here. This place isn't just about food, it's about heart. If we remember that, we'll find our way back. Her honesty inspired her team. Together, they made small adjustments, better training for the new kitchen staff, improved communication during rush hours, and a renewed focus on customer care. Slowly, things began to improve. To reconnect with her customers, Lila started a family Sunday event. Once a month, she hosted a communal dinner where guests sat at long tables and shared dishes family style. The idea was simple but powerful. Strangers came together, talking and laughing over her food, just as her own family once did. Word spread quickly, and soon the events were booked weeks in advance. The restaurant buzzed with life again. But success was always fragile. One unexpected night, the restaurant's main oven broke down just before a dinner rush. With several dishes depending on it, panic rippled through the kitchen. Lila could have cancelled orders or closed early, but instead, she and her team improvised. They used the smaller backup oven and even cooked some dishes on the stovetop. It was chaotic, messy, and imperfect, but customers appreciated the effort. Some even applauded her team at the end of the night. That night, after everyone left, Lila sat in the quiet again. The stress hadn't gone away, but something inside her had changed. She realized that no matter how many things went wrong, she could always find a way through. Every setback had made her stronger, more resilient, and more creative. Running Lila's kitchen wasn't just about food anymore, it was about learning who she was. And even in the midst of exhaustion and uncertainty, Lila felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: pride. She was building something real. Something that mattered. The journey was far from easy, but she finally understood that every mistake, every late night, and every small victory was part of her story, and that story was just getting started. By the time Lila's kitchen entered its third year, it was clear that the restaurant was becoming a local favorite. Word of mouth, coupled with Lila's continued engagement with the community, had turned her small venture into a beloved establishment. Yet, despite the growth, the familiar feeling of pressure continued to accompany every new step. Every success seemed to bring with it new challenges. Lila was no longer the only person working behind the scenes. She had built a dedicated team, and her restaurant was busier than ever. The small dining room, once cozy, now felt cramped during peak hours. Customers often had to wait for a table, and the kitchen was reaching its limits in terms of capacity. For the first time since opening, Lila began to entertain the idea of expansion, perhaps opening a second location or offering delivery and catering services. The idea felt exciting, but also terrifying. Every step of her journey had been marked by uncertainty, but this felt different. This would be her biggest leap yet, and the stakes were higher than they had ever been. She spent long hours at her desk, poring over business plans, cost estimates, and market research. She consulted with her team and even reached out to a few restaurant owners she knew for advice. Everyone seemed to agree, if she wanted to expand, now was the time. The first hurdle was financing. Lila had saved money from the restaurant's profits, but it wasn't enough to cover the cost of opening a second location. She knew she would need a business loan, and the idea of going through the application process again sent a wave of anxiety through her. She had done it once before, but this time, the amount she was requesting was significantly higher. After weeks of back and forth with the bank, Lila finally secured the loan she needed. She was thrilled but also overwhelmed by the responsibility. She knew that if she didn't get this right, Lila's kitchen could end up facing serious financial problems. To make sure the expansion was as smooth as possible, she enlisted the help of a restaurant consultant, a woman named Maria who had successfully helped multiple businesses scale. Maria was everything Lila needed: organized, methodical, and unafraid to point out the hard truths. Over the next few months, Maria helped Lila refine her systems, improve operational efficiency, and create a scalable version of Lila's kitchen that could function seamlessly in 2 locations. Once the logistics of expansion were set, Lila turned her attention to finding the right location for the second restaurant. It had to have the same warm, welcoming atmosphere that her original location had, but it also had to be in a prime spot to attract new customers. After scouting several areas, Lila found the perfect place: a bustling neighborhood with a mix of young professionals and families. It was a bit of a gamble. The area was up and coming, and while it had potential, it also came with risks. But Lila had always believed in taking calculated risks, and this felt like the right move. The process of building out the new space was a whirlwind. Lila worked closely with contractors, interior designers, and her team to ensure the new location stayed true to the cozy, intimate vibe that had made the original Lila's kitchen so successful. She chose warm colors, reclaimed wood for the tables, and a vintage-style kitchen that made the space feel homey. It was familiar, yet fresh, a perfect balance between the old and the new. As the new location took shape, Lila's original restaurant began to feel the strain of its popularity. The kitchen was still too small to keep up with the growing demand, and Lila had to make a decision. Should she focus all her energy on the new location and risk letting the original one slip, or should she maintain both businesses and try to juggle the workload? The decision was agonizing. She couldn't afford to let either location suffer, but managing 2 restaurants meant more responsibility, more hours, and more potential for things to go wrong. Lila knew she had to trust her team, but it was hard to let go. She spent less time at the original restaurant, relying more on her staff to handle the day-to-day operations. The thought of walking away from the place that had been her dream felt like a betrayal, but she understood that she needed to let go in order to grow. Opening the second location was a success in many ways. The grand opening was packed, and the food was as good as ever. The customers, many of whom had been regulars at the first location, were thrilled to have a Lila's kitchen closer to home. Lila breathed a sigh of relief when she saw the familiar faces walk through the door, showing their support for the new restaurant. It was clear that Lila's kitchen wasn't just about her, it was about the community she had built around it. But the stress of managing 2 locations soon caught up with her. She found herself dividing her time between the two places, trying to keep both kitchens running smoothly, and dealing with the constant flood of emails, phone calls, and paperwork. There were days when she felt like she was barely holding everything together, and the late nights spent on spreadsheets and scheduling left her exhausted. One evening, while waiting for the late shift to finish, Lila sat alone in the back office of the original restaurant. Her head was spinning with the logistics of running two businesses. She was proud of what she had built, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was losing control. She was no longer the hands-on chef she once was. Instead, she had become the CEO of her own small empire, a role that she hadn't fully anticipated. That's when Sarah called. "How's everything going?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Lila admitted, her voice wavering. "I'm stretched so thin, and I don't feel like I'm giving my best to either restaurant." Sarah's response was calm but firm. "Lila, you've done something incredible here. But you can't be everything to everyone. It's time to get more help, trust your team more, delegate more. You don't have to do it all yourself." Lila took her friend's advice to heart. She brought in a new general manager for the original location and promoted some of her most trusted staff members to supervisory roles. She also hired additional kitchen staff to ensure both locations could function smoothly without overloading her team. As the months passed, the pressure began to ease. Slowly, Lila found herself stepping back into the role she had always wanted, leading with passion, not exhaustion. She still spent time in the kitchen, but it was no longer the only place where her energy was needed. The expansion, while challenging, had helped Lila grow as both a leader and a business owner. She had learned the value of trusting her team, the importance of delegation, and the strength that comes from knowing when to let go. And as Lila's kitchen continued to thrive, she realized that she was no longer just running a restaurant, she was building a legacy. As the second year of operating two locations passed, Lila's kitchen continued to flourish. The second restaurant had found its rhythm, attracting a loyal group of regulars and gaining the attention of food critics. The buzz about her culinary expertise had spread beyond the local community, and Lila began to feel a sense of accomplishment. Lila's kitchen was no longer just her dream. It was a living, breathing entity with its own identity, supported by a dedicated team and a growing customer base. But while her business was thriving, Lila found herself facing a new kind of challenge. As much as she had worked to make sure both restaurants ran smoothly, she began to notice a shift in herself. The long hours, the constant pressure, and the never-ending cycle of tasks had started to drain her. She had started this journey because of her love for cooking and the joy she found in sharing meals with others, but lately, that joy seemed to have slipped away. Every day felt like a race, managing both kitchens, dealing with staff issues, making sure inventory was stocked, reviewing financial reports, and answering emails. She no longer had the time or energy to experiment with new recipes or enjoy the quiet moments in the kitchen that had once brought her peace. Cooking, once a passion, had become another task on a long to-do list. Even the simple pleasure of sitting down with her own meal felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. One afternoon, as she stood in the bustling kitchen of her first location, trying to coordinate a dozen different tasks, Lila felt the weight of everything crashing down on her. She was surrounded by the hustle of staff members working frantically to prepare for the dinner rush, the hum of the oven, the sound of knives chopping vegetables. But despite the movement around her, Lila felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness. It wasn't that she was alone physically, she had her team, her customers, and her family, but in that moment, she felt disconnected from the very thing that had brought her here, the joy of cooking. That evening, after the restaurant closed, Lila sat in her office, staring blankly at the stack of papers on her desk. She hadn't even realized how long she had been sitting there until her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Sarah. "I'm coming over tomorrow. You need a break. You're burning yourself out." Lila smiled, grateful for her friend's persistence. She didn't need convincing, she was at the point where she couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Something had to change. The next day, Sarah arrived at Lila's kitchen early in the morning, bringing with her a sense of calm that Lila desperately needed. They sat down together, and Sarah gently encouraged Lila to talk about how she was feeling. "I've built something amazing here, Sarah," Lila said, her voice thick with emotion. "But I don't know who I am anymore. I'm so busy keeping everything afloat that I've forgotten why I started this in the first place. I used to love cooking, but now it feels like just another job." Sarah listened carefully before responding. "Lila, You've built Lila's kitchen from the ground up, but now it's time to take a step back. You can't pour from an empty cup. If you don't take care of yourself, you won't be able to take care of your business. For the first time in months, Lila let herself acknowledge the truth. She had been running on empty for far too long. She had pushed aside her own needs in pursuit of building something bigger than herself, but in doing so, she had lost the joy that had once fueled her passion for food. That afternoon, Lila made a decision. She was going to take a break, a real break, not just a few hours here and there. She would spend time away from the restaurant, reconnect with her love for cooking, and rediscover the spark that had driven her to open Lila's kitchen in the first place. For the next week, Lila handed over the reins to her general managers at both locations. She made arrangements for the staff to handle the day-to-day operations, and she told her team she was taking some time off. It felt terrifying to let go, but she knew it was necessary. She spent the next few days visiting local farmers markets, buying fresh ingredients, and experimenting with new recipes in the quiet of her own kitchen. She took long walks in the park, cooked for her family, and sat down for leisurely meals, savoring every bite. She reconnected with the joy of food, the joy of sharing meals with the people she loved, and the joy of creating something from scratch. It wasn't easy to step away, but as the week went on, Lila began to feel a sense of peace returning. The exhaustion in her body started to fade, and the joy she had once felt in the kitchen came back in small, quiet moments. She realized that she had been so focused on keeping her business alive that she had neglected the very thing that had made it worth building, her passion. When Lila returned to Lila's kitchen, she was a different person. She was refreshed, more grounded, and more in touch with her own sense of purpose. She still had challenges to face. Running 2 locations was no small feat, but she now had the clarity to approach those challenges with a renewed sense of perspective. She sat down with her team and shared her experience. I've realized that this restaurant isn't just about feeding people, it's about creating something meaningful, something that brings joy to both our customers and ourselves. If we're not enjoying what we do, we won't be able to share that joy with others. Together, they made changes. Lila began to delegate more, trusting her team to take ownership of their roles. She started focusing on what she truly loved: cooking, creating new recipes, and working with her staff to ensure that the heart and soul of Lila's kitchen remained intact. She implemented new systems that allowed her to spend more time in the kitchen and less time on administrative tasks. Lila also introduced a new tradition, chef's table nights, where she would personally cook for a small group of guests, sharing her stories and her passion for food. It became a way for her to reconnect with the personal side of her work, and it quickly became a beloved event. It reminded her that the restaurant wasn't just a business, it was an expression of herself, her family, and her love of cooking. As time passed, Lila found the balance she had been seeking. The expansion, the challenges, the growing pains, all of it had led her to this moment of clarity. Lila's kitchen was more than just a restaurant. It was her legacy. And in that moment, Lila realized that she didn't need to do everything herself. She just needed to stay true to the passion that had started it all. In the end, the joy Lila had rediscovered wasn't just about the food, it was about the people, the connections, and the love that went into every meal. And with that joy, Lila's kitchen would continue to thrive for years to come. The years passed, and Lila's kitchen had become more than just a business, it had become a landmark in the community. The restaurant was no longer just a place to eat, it was a place where memories were made, where friends and families gathered to celebrate life's milestones, where people felt at home, no matter where they came from. It had grown into a reflection of everything Lila had envisioned when she first took that leap of faith, a space filled with warmth, good food, and an authentic connection to her heritage. But for Lila, success was never measured by the number of customers served or the amount of revenue generated. It was measured by the moments, the heartfelt compliments from regulars, the joy she saw in her team's eyes when they served a perfect meal, the laughter around the tables during chef's table nights. Lila's kitchen was a place where food became a bridge, connecting people, cultures, and stories. It had become a living testament to the power of passion, resilience, and love. As the years went by, Lila had learned to embrace her role as both a chef and a business owner, striking a balance between the art of cooking and the reality of running a growing enterprise. She had expanded her team, empowering her staff to take on more responsibility and develop their own leadership skills. The original location continued to thrive, and the second location had long since found its place in the city's culinary landscape. One quiet afternoon, as Lila sat in her office, going over the numbers from the past quarter, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It had been a long road, filled with challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt. But through it all, Lila's kitchen had endured. And now, as she looked around the restaurant, she saw not just her own hard work, but the collective effort of a team that had come together to build something truly special. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a text from Sarah. "Hey, how about a celebration tonight? A little family dinner at Lila's kitchen. You deserve it." Lila smiled, grateful for the reminder that, despite everything, she needed to take a moment to celebrate. She texted back, "Sounds perfect." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow over the city, Lila stood in the middle of the bustling restaurant, watching as her team prepared for another evening of service. The energy was palpable, laughter echoed from the kitchen, the sound of clinking glasses filled the air, and the familiar aroma of comfort food drifted through the room. It was a good night, just like any other. But this one felt different. Lila realized she had come full circle. She had started Lila's kitchen with a vision, a dream of creating a space where food wasn't just sustenance but a way to bring people together, to share stories, and to create lasting memories. Now, all these years later, that dream was alive and well. The restaurant had become a cornerstone of the community, a place where people could feel the love and care in every dish, a place where they could come and feel like family. Sarah arrived with a few close friends, and they settled into a corner booth, enjoying the same simple but delicious meal that had launched Lila's dream years ago: pot roast, mashed potatoes, mac and cheese, and that famous apple pie. As they laughed and shared stories, Lila looked around at her friends, her staff, and the customers who came in night after night. This was what it was all about. The next morning, Lila woke up with a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in a long time. She had spent so many years juggling responsibilities, handling crises, and putting out fires. But now, as she stood on the other side of it all, she realized that Lila's kitchen had become more than just a restaurant. It had become a place where people connected, where love was served with every plate, and where tradition was passed on from one generation to the next. But Lila knew that it was time for the next chapter. She had always believed that a business should evolve, just as its creator does. Lila had spent years building something from nothing, and now it was time to step back and think about how to continue her legacy without sacrificing her own happiness or well-being. She wasn't ready to walk away completely, but she did feel ready to pass the baton to the next generation. A few months later, Lila sat down with her team to discuss the future. She had spent weeks reflecting on her journey and what she wanted for the restaurant moving forward. She knew the business was in good hands, and it was time to make the difficult decision to step into a more advisory role. Her general managers, who had grown with the business and shown their commitment to the values of Lila's kitchen, were ready to take on more leadership. Lila was confident that they would carry the torch and continue the mission she had started. They had all become a part of the family, her family. As she passed the reins to her team, Lila felt a deep sense of peace. She wasn't walking away from Lila's kitchen, she was simply allowing it to continue to grow and evolve. And in that moment, she realized that her legacy would not be defined by the number of restaurants she owned or the awards she had won. It would be defined by the people she had touched, the community she had built, and the joy she had shared through food. Lila's kitchen would continue to thrive, and it would carry forward the values that Lila had instilled in it: passion, authenticity, and a love for the simple, beautiful act of sharing a meal. And as Lila stepped back, spending more time cooking at home, enjoying quiet moments with her family, and traveling to explore new culinary experiences, she knew that she had created something far beyond a restaurant. She had created a legacy of flavor, heart, and the belief that it's never too late to follow your dreams. In the end, Lila's kitchen was more than just a place to eat, it was a place where lives were changed, one dish at a time. And that was the true measure of her success.